Welcome back to Blue Collar Coder and part 5 of our in-depth series on arrays. So in the previous episode, we took a look at map, and in this episode, we'll be taking a look at the mother of all array methods, and that's reduce. Now, before we jump into it, I have to say, if you are a React developer, you're probably good with what you've seen already. Filter and map are the two biggest friends you're going to have in React land, but reduce is a fantastic array method. So if you're into it, stick around and find out all about this awesome array method. All right, so as we've done with almost every other one of these videos, we're going to start off with an array of numbers. And what we're going to do with this one is we are going to use a traditional for loop to get a sum out of this. So we just want to sum up all these numbers. So I'm going to do let sum equals 0. Now I'm using let here because we're going to mutate this sum value over time. Then I'm going to use for and then const and then value of numbers. And then I'm going to say sum plus equals value, and that's going to give us our sum. So in this case, that's 150. I used const here because we're not going to mutate the value of that number as we're in the body of this for loop, right? We have to use a let here, but we can use a const here. So how does this translate into reduce? So the first thing you need to figure out is what you are going to reduce, the subject. So in this case, the subject is numbers. So we're going to do numbers.reduce. So reduce takes two parameters. It takes a function, and then it takes the initial value. So what was our initial value for this for loop? Well, it was 0, right? That's the sum, and that's what we want to create out of this reduce. So we're going to copy that 0 into there. And then when it comes to our reduce function, it takes two parameters as well. There's actually some extra ones, but there's two primary parameters. The first one is the accumulator value, and that's what gets propagated from each iteration of the reduce to the next iteration. And in this case, that's going to be that sum. That is the value that we're going to have at the end of the cycle. And then coming in at each iteration, we're going to have the value, right? Next thing we want to do is, well, what do we want to do with this? Well, we want to add sum to that value. All right, so pretty good so far, but if we look at what we get out of this, we get out of this undefined. And why are we doing that? Well, we need to return the new sum, and that goes into the next iteration. So I'm going to do return the sum here. And then you can see that at the end of this, we get 150. And you can see sum accumulating over time, starting at 0, going to 10, 30, 60, 100. So sum increases over time, and that's exactly what you want to do. So this is the classic sum example, though we can actually reduce this a little bit further. So I'm going to go and copy and paste this. And instead of doing this whole section here, I'm just going to say that we want the sum plus the value. So why does this work? Well, this expression, whatever that results in, becomes the return, the implicit return here of this function. So it's just an easier, lighter way to do this. All right, so I mentioned that there are other parameters to the reduce as well, and those are the index and the original array reference. So let's say that we want to go and get an average of all of these numbers. So I'm going to do numbers.reduce. And again, we're going to start with a function, and our average is going to start at 0. And then we're going to have our computed average. We're going to need our value as well. We don't need the index, but we do need the array, the original array. And the reason we need that is because we need the length of the array. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say that we want the average plus the current value over the array length. So let's see what that computes to. Well, that computes to 30, which when you take 150, which is the sum, divided by the number of items in the array, which is 5, you get 30. So that's a good average. So what we've basically done here is compute a rolling average. So every single item in the array gets added, but at 1/5 of its value, and that gives you a nice rolling average. So that's how you might use that fourth item. And of course, this third item in here is that index. So let's see how we might use that. Well, let's start off with an array of strings. And what we want to do is we want to join all those strings together using a comma. So we'll do names.reduce. And again, we'll take a function and a starting value. So in this case, the starting value is an empty string. And this is going to be our string, and this is going to be our name. And at this point, all we're going to do is just add the name and the string together. And what that's going to give us is all of those names, LG, Mimi, Sadie, and Ripley, all just smushed together just like that. So we need to go and add a comma in there. So let's do that. Let's say comma, like that. And now we get the commas, but we also get the starting item is also commaed. So what we can do here is we can check to see what the index is. And if the index is 0, then we don't add the comma. But if it's greater than 0, then we do add the comma. So let's put an index in there. And then we'll wrap this comma in an expression. And I'll say if index is greater than 0, then do the comma. Otherwise, just use an empty string like that. And let's see what we get out of this. Let's see. Put that on the next line so we can see it. Ah, perfect. Awesome. So this is the best possible way to join an array together using commas. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, if you check this in, I'd be really angry with you because the actual best way to do this is to just use the join method. So we'll just use names and then do join, and you can give it whatever you want. For example, you can give it a colon if you wanted, and it's going to join them all together with colons, or of course, in our case, we just want commas. And so this is a far better way to do what I just did. And that's often the case when it comes to reduce. There are times when reduce is just really cool and exciting, and other times when you should just keep with the simple stuff, which in this case is join. All right, well, we talked about how to take an array and reduce it down to a single value, like a sum or a string or an average. Let's talk about how to reduce an array to another array. So let's start off again with our list of numbers. So I want to start off by constructing an array out of this array, basically a copy. So let's start off with let array, and we'll start off with an empty array. And we'll use our old friend for of, so I'll say const number of numbers. And then for each item in the array, I'm going to create a new version of the array and reassign itself with all of the contents from the original array plus the new number. And at the end, what we're going to have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you can see, we started with 1, got 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, and so on. Hey, you want to reverse it? Check this out. Watch this. This is really cute. There we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice. Okay, blast off. So how do we do this with reduce? Well, let's try that out. So let's do numbers.reduce. And then again, we're going to take a function and a starting point. So what's our starting point? Well, let's look back up here. That's an empty array. Awesome. We're going to call this array, just like we did before. We're going to call this number. And instead of having a function like that, I'm just going to return an array. Where I'm going to do exactly what we did here. I'm going to do array and then number. At least that's the original version that we had before I reversed it like that. And now we've got a copy of that array. So when I select all this, we see that the output of that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so let's try this again, but use another function that is closely related to reduce called reduce write. And what reduce write does is do exactly the same thing, except start at the end and then go all the way back to the beginning for you. So in that case, you get the implicit reverse because as you're traversing through that array, you are coming at it from the end and going to the beginning, and so you get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Of course, all of this is really just silly at this point because we could just have used map, or in this case, in just the copy case, we can just use array destructuring as we've seen before. But one of the cool things that you can do with reduce is create a different sized array than the one you already have, right? So when it comes to map, you have an item and you produce a new item, and that becomes a new item in the array. And so it's a one-to-one correspondence between those two things. What if you want the input array to create a different size of output array? Well, reduce can do that for you. So let's start off with a set of groups. And we've got an array of arrays here. So what we want is we want the output of this to be a new array where there's 3 2s, because it's 3 and then 2. We want 2 5s. And then 3 7s, just like that. Because this is the count, and then that is the value that we want the count of. All right, so let's start off with a reduce on this. So I'm going to do groups.reduce and a function. And then the starting value is going to be an array. And what are we getting here? Well, we're getting the array, and then the count and the value. And so in here, we could just do a simple for loop. So I can say for let index equals 0, index is less than count, index plus plus, and then array.push value, and then we'll return the array. All right, there we go. Looks like we're getting what we want. 222, 55, 777. Nice. But there's a lot easier ways to do this. And the first thing to understand is that there's other ways to create an array other than just doing that. You can also predefine the length of an array. So I can say array and then 3. And then that's going to give me an array that has 3 items in it. And I can fill that array with a certain value using array.fill and put in, like, for example, 2 there. And now I get an array that has 3 2s. Hope you can see where I'm going with this. So let's try this again. So groups.reduce. Again, we'll have our function. We'll start off with an empty array. We'll have our return array, and then the count and the value, just like we did before. And we're going to return an array where we took all of the existing array, and so that's why we use that array destructuring. And then we're going to use this array fill method in here. And let's see what we get. Well, we get a lot of 2s, but if you replace the 3 with count and replace the value with that, then we get the output that we want. 222, 55, 777. So now we've seen that reduce can create a new array that's the same or smaller or larger than the original array. Let's now see how reduce can take an array and create an object from that. So we'll start off with this list of numbers. And what I want to do is I want to get the count of each one of those unique numbers. So in this case, we're going to have, I think, 3 12s, 2 6s, 2 2s, and a 15. So I'm going to create a lookup. This is a standard way to do this. And I'm going to go through each one of those numbers. Again, const number of numbers. And now I'm going to say lookup number is the current lookup number plus 1. But the problem there is this might be undefined, and it is originally. So I need to turn that into an expression and say that when that is undefined, we'll use 0 instead. And let's look at what lookup did. There we go. So now I've got an array lookup that says that for 2, there's 2 of those. For 6, there's 2 of those. For 12, there's 3. And for 15, there is 1. Awesome. Okay, so let's do the same thing with reduce. So again, my subject is numbers. We're going to reduce. We're going to have a function. Our starting point is going to be an empty object. And we will call that one lookup. And we're going to be returning an object with all of the original lookup. And let's take the value here. And then we're going to say that we want the key here to be that value. And then we're going to put that expression in there with that value. And now we get 2 2s, 6 2s, and so on. So, okay, so why does this work? Well, what's happening is that each time we iterate through that loop, we're creating a new object. And that object has all the original keys in it. And you can see, for example, it starts off with 12 and has 1, 12 and then has 1, then 15 has 1, so on and so forth. And then in here, we set the key using that value. So that's why the bracket syntax. If I just had value in here, what you get is a literal thing that said value equals 1. But I need to put brackets around that because that basically says take the value and use that as the key. And then I'm going to set that to the current value plus 1. But why does this actually work really? Well, it overrides. So if there's a 12 that's already in the lookup, then this one overrides it because it's defined later in the sequence, right? So anything that's defined earlier in the sequence is overwritten if there's the same key later in the sequence. All right, so a little experiment here. Let's try and find the minimum and maximum of this array. So I'm going to use numbers.reduce again. And here I'm going to create a custom object. And it's going to say that min is currently infinity and max is negative infinity. And so I'm going to have here min and max, and then the value. And we're going to return an object where min is the math.min of the current min and the current value. And then max is the same thing for max. All right, let's see what this comes out as. Well, we got a min of 2 and a max of 15. So it's important to realize that one of the cool things about reduce is you don't necessarily have to have any correlation between the object type that you're creating and the object type that you're traversing over in any way. That is just, those two things are just completely disconnected, which makes it super powerful. So when I started off this video, I talked about how reduce is the mother of all the array methods. And I actually mean that kind of literally, in that you can create any of the original array methods we've gone and looked at so far using reduce, because essentially the function signature of reduce makes it usable in almost every case. So let's start off again with a list of numbers, and I'm going to reproduce includes. So includes, you just give it a value and it's going to tell you whether that value is in the array or not. So let's take a look. So let's do that. Numbers.reduce, and I'll give it a function, and we're going to start off with false, saying that we don't have that item in the array. And we're going to say includes and then value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a ternary. I'm going to say if we already know that we have found one already that matches that, then just pass that on. It's going to be true. Otherwise, we're going to say, does that value equal some value that we're looking for? For example, 3. All right, so it turns out that this is true. Let's try it again with something that's not going to be in there, like, for example, 10. And that turns out to be false. So pretty nice. Okay, let's try another one. Let's reproduce slice as an example. So I'm going to do numbers.reduce. Again, start with a function. And we're going to be returning an array because that's what slice gives you. And so we're going to accumulate an array. And we're going to have the value and the index because we want to take a slice based on the index. So again, I'm going to use a ternary. And I'm going to say that if the index is greater than 0, means starting at 1, and the index is less than, say, 4, then we're going to return the array with the current value. Otherwise, we're just going to return the array. Well, let's take a look at what we get out here. Yep, we get 2, 3, and 4. So basically, we have now created a slice of that array between these two indices. And let's try just one more. Let's try map. So we're going to start off with numbers. Again, do reduce. Function, we're going to start off with an empty array. We're going to have our array here and our value. We're going to return an array, which is all of the original array. And then the value, say, times 100. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. So a direct copy of map. Of course, you shouldn't do any of this. You should use those original methods. But if you want to learn reduce, this is actually a really good way to do that, to just go through the exercise of taking almost any other array method and implementing it using reduce. Okay, so let's take a look at 3 related methods that are a little obscure but are good to know. And that's values, keys, and entries. And so you're like, well, why do arrays have keys? You'll see in a second. Okay, so let's start off with our values. And then you can say values dot, for example, entries. So what this returns is an iterator. And one of the nice things is that you can use for of to iterate over an iterator. So we're going to take, for example, const value here and do of value.entries, and then we'll do console.log, and we'll see what that value looks like. So here's what entries gives you back. It gives you essentially an array of arrays, and that array has the index as the first item, and then the value is the second item. So in this case, we got 0 and 10, 1 and 20, and so on and so forth. Let's take a look at what keys gives you. Keys gives you 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the keys into the array. And then values gives you the values, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So why is this cool? Well, you can use the same entries, keys, and values between objects and arrays. So it's actually kind of neat. So let's say that we have a set of customers here. And in both of these cases, with values and with customers, we want to be able to give a sum. So I'm going to create a function. and it's called sum, and it's going to take an object or an array. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call object.values, which is essentially the same as calling .values on the array, and give it our object or array. And then I'm going to reduce based on that. And this is basically going to be our simple sum. So it's going to have a sum, the value. We're going to say sum plus value, and then start it at 0. And then I'm going to sum our values, see what that comes out to. That comes out to 150, nice. And then I'm going to sum based on our customers. And that's going to add up to 45 because 12 plus 15 plus 18 is 45. So pretty neat. And in some cases, you can use objects just like arrays using these entries, keys, and values methods. All right, so the last thing I want to look at was something that I promised all the way back in the first part of this, and that was that there actually is a way to use reduce to do a sequential set of promises. And I didn't show it back then, but I'm going to show it now because we now know a lot more about reduce. So let's go back and take a look at the part 1 async. And I'm going to go grab get by ID here and put it into part 5 async. I'm also going to grab our list of numbers. All right. Exciting. We're going to start off with our array of IDs. We are going to do reduce. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our function just like we normally do. And what we're going to be doing is passing a promise down. And what we're going to start out with is a promise.resolve. And promise.resolve is a static method on promise that returns an already resolved promise. Why would you do that? Well, for cases kind of like this, actually. So we need an async function in here. So this is going to be a promise. And then we're going to have the ID. So because we're iterating over these IDs. And then in here, we are going to await that promise that we got before. And the first time through, we will be awaiting this already resolved promise. And then we return get by ID on the ID. And so that's going to return a promise that is then the next time through going to get awaited. All right, let's try this out. So let's do node and then part 5 async, run it. Got 10, got 20, got 30, and we waited a second on each one. That is a sequential set of promises using what some people refer to as the reduce hack. All right, so let's review everything that we've learned. So we've learned how to reduce to a single value. We've learned how to reduce to arrays of different sizes. We've learned how to reduce to an object. So you started off with an array and you created an object out of that. Pretty cool. We've looked at how reduce can reproduce every single method in arrays. And we've looked at entries and keys and values. And then, of course, we've looked at the asynchronous hack that you can use around reduce to get sequential promises going. Well, I hope this helps demystify reduce for you. It is a fantastic method once you get used to it, but it should be used with caution. Of course, if you have any questions on this, be sure to put those in the comments section down below. I can't wait to hear what you have for questions. In the meantime, of course, if you like the video, just hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit the subscribe button, click on that bell, and you'll be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.